then what happens is, as soon as the leaders start to view him in a negative way, they treat him different. And then they set the tone and the example of how everybody else is supposed to treat that person. So now this person asks a question, and all of a sudden, everything gets a little strange for them. Everything gets a little bit weird. And it's always a result of them asking a question.
The World Mission Society Church of God does not tolerate criticism or dissent. In my extreme case, of course, they sued me for defamation, for telling my story and telling about my experience and what the things that I saw in the church. I think, again, that's the extreme case because there was a whole website and everything. And I also think they needed to make an example out of someone. But even if you're in the church, from what I understand, a lot of people have gone through this. If you ask questions and you're not new, because new people kind of get away with it a little bit in the beginning, you're looked down on, and they kind of turn it around on you and say, well, something's wrong with you. Or sometimes they'll even come out and say that you're stupid, which is another thing that happened to me in a passive aggressive way. After I asked a bunch of questions, the pastor in Ridgewood did an entire service and said in front of the entire congregation, like, if you've done all of your basic studies, then, you're stupid. Like somebody just said in the comments, like, using your own mind, that's a no-no. You're supposed to think as the church thinks and as they want you to think, and do as they want you to do. So if you are somebody who asks questions that they don't necessarily have answers to, that's a problem for them, and they don't react positively to those things, in my experience.
So I want to open it now to any of you other guys to comment on that, to confirm that if you have specific examples of how you personally saw that as being true. Open season. Feel free to jump in.
I definitely saw it. Even when I was still a member, and I would ask questions about like a study or something, or no, specifically something in like the Green Book, right? I'd read something wouldn't make sense, and I'd ask the questions to the overseer's wife, and then she would throw it back on me like, why am I asking that question? That I'm not studying hard enough. If I was studying hard enough, I wouldn't have that question. And I remember, like, once there's a subject in the WMS called what is the gospel? And they teach that the gospel is the new covenant, which is Passover. And so part of that study, it explains that, the apostles, or Jesus, he preached the gospel, right? The apostles, they preached the gospel. But none of them, I remember mentioning to them, I said, none of them actually said Passover, right, is the gospel. And even the apostles, they never preached about the Passover. And I remember asking that question, and it was completely turned back on me. Like, if you studied harder, you wouldn't have that question. So even within the church, even asking just a question about the doctrine, they turn it back on you. Let alone, stuff like you see on the examining site where it's like, obviously more incredulous stuff, as like tax forms and whatnot. But so that obviously they get mad about. But even their own doctrine, when you're a believing member, they get mad.
So what you're kind of pointing out there is this, what I think would fall into the category of gaslighting, where you bring a sincere issue or doubt or concern. You see something, whether in the doctrine or in somebody's behavior, that you find to be objectively, troubling or wrong, and you honestly bring that to somebody in leadership, and they respond to that not by saying, "Oh, that makes sense," validating that or anything like that, but making you feel like there's something wrong with you for asking that question in the first place.
Yeah. And I didn't even ask the question because I was doubting, or it was just a genuine question. Oftentimes the questions that I asked when it came to the studies was because I thought, if I'm preaching, someone's going to ask me that question, and I want to be prepared with an answer to defend it. So, but even in that case, they, like you said, it's gaslighting. They turn it back on you, that there's something wrong with me for even having that question in the first place and voicing it. And then there's the whole, asking the question inside your head too element, which is like, a big no for them too. But yeah.
Right. Anthony, you were chomping at the bit, so go for it.
Yeah. Well, Kelsey, actually, that was a really good point. I was going to say that, when you're talking about, Jesus preaching the gospel, and if the gospel is the Passover, and the Passover wasn't given at that point, so what is he preaching exactly? But anyway, on a different point, yeah, I've seen it for sure. I've noticed what Michele is saying. I've actually heard the pastor of the East Coast, Daniel Lee, he spoke about this before. He said that if you study up to King David and then you still have questions, something's not right. Something's wrong up here. Like saying basically that you're a stupid person if you have questions after that point, meaning that the only people who are allowed to have a question are the members who don't know the doctrine. So as soon as you start to study and as soon as you get to know what they're actually teaching, because they don't show you everything up front, they hide everything. They give you little bits and pieces. So when you're brand new, you're not going to have questions. You're not going to have deeper thoughts about what they're teaching. But once you are there for a while and you really see what they're teaching, that's when the questions come up. But if somebody asks a question, what's going to be the result? I talked about this in one of the previous videos, but I'm not sure if everyone's full of like all the catalog of videos, but I had witnessed this one member who had been in the church and he had a question. He had been there for a couple of years, and it was about Jesus's resurrected body. After the resurrection, they said that he was not in his normal flesh. He was in a different, unique resurrection flesh that is different from his body before. And he asked the question, then why does he still have the piercings on his hand? Well, after that question was asked, the overseer of the location gathered all the members of the the leadership members and said, oh, I thought this brother had better faith than that. Why is he asking these questions? And then what happens is as soon as the leaders start to view him in a negative way, they treat him different. And then they set the tone and the example of how everybody else is supposed to treat that person. So now this person asks a question and all of a sudden everything gets a little strange for them. Everything gets a little bit weird. And it's always a result of them asking a question. So what happens is if you receive a negative social result for asking a question, you're not going to ask the question. You're going to keep it inside and just hope that one day God will reveal the answer to you somewhere down the line. But to ask the question, it's such a bad result that you just keep quiet about it. And you just think, oh, I'm a sinner. This is the truth. This is the only truth. How can I question it? So, they definitely do discourage you having any sort of question. And then if you do, or if you have anything, you're attacked for it. So you just learn to shut up. So, I've definitely witnessed a lot of that.